Welcome to Talking Data Equity. My name is Heather Kraus, and I am very, very happy that you have found your way to this weekly event called Talking Data Equity. The event is brought to you by the organization that I founded, which is called We All Count. And We All Count is a small organization with a really specific purpose. We build tools and provide trainings that support anybody in any sector in any country that is trying to align the work that they're doing with data with the values and priorities of the project that they're working on. And my favorite thing that we do is this Talking Data Equity, which is something that's held most Fridays. I'm going to put a link in the chat. You can always go to that link to find out what topic we're going to be talking about, who our special guests are. You can also, at that link in the chat, make recommendations of topics you'd like us to discuss or guest speakers you'd like us to have. We're always trying to meet your needs. That's the reason that we exist. Talking Data Equity is here to put practical tools and real world ideas into your hands that will make your jobs more successful and easier. And also, in this incredibly turbulent time, Talking Data Equity is designed to remind you that it is still worth it and you are not alone and progress is possible. And this week, last thing I'm going to say is that we do record Talking Data Equity, and we put the recordings in our data equity community forum. That's not a membership site. That's a public good. You can make your way over there anytime to watch some of the hundreds of past Talking Data Equities that we have. And you can also ask questions. Me and my team are in there all the time, but more importantly, people with a lot of great experience in all kinds of sectors are in there talking about what are we going to do now? How are we going to analyze data? Where are we going to get data? Highly recommend you hop in there. Okay. You can tell that I'm trying to stop talking so that I can turn as much time as possible over to this week's special guest. And this week's special guest is a fabulous, highly recommended speaker and researcher. She has some experience here in my town of Toronto, but she's coming to us right now from Atlanta, Georgia. So we're going to welcome Dr. Allison Cuttner. And Allison completed her PhD in political science at Emory University in 2021. And prior to joining the quantitative theory and methods part of Emory, excuse me, she was a postdoctoral fellow here at the University of Toronto. Well, I should say here. I'm not at the University of Toronto, but I am in the city of Toronto at the University of Toronto. And she does really, really interesting research. And we will link to a lot of this research and a lot of the resources that we're going to talk about today. Her research focuses on distributive politics, governance, and personnel in non-democracies and developing countries. She teaches research design, she teaches research methods, and she also has a very, very cool dog, which you can see if you go to her website. And some of the most interesting papers I have read all week. So again, we're going to put links to all this stuff so you can take a look. But more than anything, I want to stop talking and turn it over. Oh, I'm so sorry, Allison. I forgot one thing. The logistics, because I know we have a lot of new folks with us today. How this works is we have a Zoom meeting with a couple hundred people in it. And Zoom tells us not to do this, that it's not going to work, but it works for us almost every week. And that's because you folks are fabulous. And what we ask is while our guest speaker is sharing her slides and stories, that you do keep your microphone turned off. Feel free to use the chat. Use the chat as much as you'd like. You can chat to each other. You can also direct message me. My name is Heather Kraus. You can just put that in the drop down. And then once our guest speaker is done sharing her slides and stories, then you're going to have an opportunity to turn your microphone on and ask questions directly. But until then, use the chat. Thank you so much, Allison, for making time in your schedule. I've read so much of your work, and I'm so excited to have you as our special guest today. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Heather. I'm really excited to be here. And the project that I'm going to be sharing with all of you is in progress. So I'm really excited to hear what everyone thinks about it and get your feedback. And it's about increasing accessibility in surveys. And it is a project that's funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada that we started when I was a postdoc at the University of Toronto. So this is a team project between myself and a couple of collaborators, both in Canada and in the US. So Danielle Jung, Wendy Wong, who's at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, Amanda Murdy at the University of Georgia, and Zara Basiri also at UBCO. So today I'm going to talk pretty briefly about the background of the project and what we're working on in terms of design-wise and try and justify why our design is the best to learn about what we are interested in learning about. And then I'm going to show you some pictures of our visual survey design and where we are in our process for validating this new type of survey that we're working on. So everyone's probably taken a survey before, even if it's just a poll, even if it's not like a research survey. But a lot of research, especially social science research, is about people, right? People's opinions, people's behavior, what they do. And the easiest way, and sometimes the best way to learn about people is to just ask them. So ask them what their beliefs are, what their opinions are, what they've experienced, and basic information about them and their families and their communities. So surveys can take a lot of different forms. They can include experiments that we can use to make really strong inferences about causes and effects in people's lives. And they can also inform public policy. So they're a really like important tool that we use to do research. A lot of people have moved, especially in the last, 10 years or so, towards online surveys. So back in the day, right, enumerators would go house to house or apartment to apartment, right, to actually find someone at a particular address to survey them face to face. This is extremely expensive. It still does happen, right? But it requires a lot of local expertise for the area that you're trying to conduct surveys in, or a partner in that local area that can train these incredibly skilled enumerators that often we need to be multilingual to go to these different areas, homes, what have you, in order to conduct the survey. And there's a lot of people that are left out by face-to-face survey methods, right? Anyone that lives in a really remote or hard to reach geographic area or a dangerous area, right? Survey enumerators, either intentionally or unintentionally, will not conduct surveys in those areas. So we're missing a lot of people that we want to know about and want to learn about doing face-to-face surveys. It's also really difficult for researchers because it's so expensive and it requires often travel to whatever location you want to learn about. So it's not an available option for a lot of young researchers or people at universities that don't have incredibly elite research budgets. Another way that people have done surveys is through phone calls, right? Everyone's probably gotten a robocall or a phone call that is some sort of poll or survey. To do surveys for research via phone call, right, we also need enumerators, people who are on the phone asking the questions, to be somewhat skilled in asking those questions and perhaps multilingual as well. Phone surveys and polls have become very difficult to use because people will auto block, phones will auto block numbers that are coming from a source that seems like it's an auto dialer. And I personally never answer the phone if it's an unknown number. And I think a lot of people are usually doing that now, where we don't answer phone calls if it's coming from someone outside of our contacts. Another issue with phone surveys is that the participant, the person answering the survey, won't be able to view any text, see any images. They just have to be able to hear what it is the person on the other end of the line is asking them, understand it, and be able to respond, which is a lot to ask of someone. Of course, we have a lot of people left out of these surveys, people who are screening or blocking their phone calls, people with audio impairment that have difficulty hearing on the phone would be systematically underrepresented in phone surveys. Online is the most popular, right? We can use online surveys translate the text questionnaire to different languages. So we only need one translator instead of needing multilingual enumerators to conduct the surveys. Of course, online surveys also have their problems, right? People click through an online survey without giving it their full attention, without really reading carefully about the questions. This can be incredibly difficult to get good quality data out of online surveys. If you have to write out every question and answer option that someone can respond to, it's a little bit limiting in terms of maybe having a conversation or opening up open-ended questions for your participants. And of course, we still have people that are not represented in online surveys. People who have low or no internet access, people who just don't see the link or the call for participants, and people who have low literacy that wouldn't be able to read and respond to a text-based survey. So we are trying to use visual surveys instead. So we want to use online survey methods because they're mostly, as the internet becomes more widely available, right, good at getting new participants in areas that were not reached before, but we're worried about text. Right? We're worried about our translations being accurate, doing enough translations to enough local languages that people would be able to actually understand and respond. And text is just hard for people with low literacy or low attention spans. So we are trying to conduct visual surveys and build visual surveys alongside or in lieu of text. And we're hoping that this is going to improve access and accuracy for low literacy individuals, individuals who use less common local languages that are not usually translated in our surveys, as well as people with maybe low attention spans or who just don't like reading. This is like my soapbox a little bit of like why we think that this is really important. If we are systematically excluding low literacy or just linguistically marginalized communities, so people who use less common languages, none of the research that uses text-based surveys are applicable to the areas where those people live. So that means a lot of the text-based surveys and the research that is coming out of that, the conclusions that we're drawing from those surveys are not generalizable or applicable to really large portions of the world. And that's the issue that we're trying to combat by using visuals. So we are not the first people to use visual surveys or come up with pictorial surveys. It's much more common outside of the social sciences. So in medicine and healthcare, right? Maybe you've seen a pain scale at the doctor's office, like little faces that are indicating how much pain the patient is in. So in medicine, a pictorial or visual survey is much more common. So when we talk about the benefits that we think could accrue to using a visual survey, I'm talking about both what we hypothesize or what we hope our benefits are, but also what's come from other research in other disciplines. So again, this is medicine, healthcare, psychology, a little bit in agriculture, business and marketing, have developed more of these visual or pictorial surveys. So what they have found is that using visuals or pictures make the survey faster for participants. Participants are more engaged. It's language independent, so it does not matter what the respondents' preferred language to use is. It's accessible for people with impaired communication. So if someone's suffering from a stroke, for example, they can point to the picture of how they're feeling or what's going on with them, even if they can't talk. There is some suggestion that there might be improved accuracy. It depends on which paper you read. It's going in other directions. And hopefully we can avoid using technical terminology and jargon. And again, this is really coming from medicine, where the technical term for a symptom is not something that people are familiar with or would know how to describe. So if you can illustrate the symptom in a picture, then it's easy for someone to say, yes, I'm experiencing that without having to use technical jargon. Nothing comes without costs. So we think that and from the literature, using visual surveys, they could take longer for participants. Some research has found that it's faster to click through pictures than read words. But if someone has to sit and think about what the question is asking them, what the picture is actually illustrating, it could take longer. to actually create and validate these visuals that are a fair comparison or comparable to the text-based question might take a really long time, as I'll talk about in a few minutes. There could be misinterpretation. There's a picture. We think it's asking something. The person that's taking the survey is misinterpreting what the question is asking them. So that would lead to a data issue or validity. And it can be difficult to turn complex concepts into pictures or visuals that everyone understands. So how we are testing or designing our visual survey to see if it actually has these benefits or costs that have been hypothesized in the literature is to directly compare text-based survey question to a visual counterpart that should be asking the same question. And then we randomize participants, right, respondents for our survey to the text version versus the visual version. So by randomizing, we're guaranteeing that the only difference on average between those two groups of who saw the text and who saw the visual is the question mode. Because it's randomized, there should be no other systematic differences between those two groups. So our full design of what we're doing, we recruit participants to our online survey. We record some demographic information about them, including their preferred language and their comfort with reading. We're not asking, are you illiterate? But we just want to see, do you like reading? Do you feel comfortable? Do you read a lot? We randomize participants to receive either the text question or the visual question, and we record how long they spend answering each question to see if one is faster than the other. And then at the end, we record their overall satisfaction and ease of the experience. Did they find, for the people taking the visual version, it to be more engaging, more fun, easy to understand? So for our visuals, how we chose which questions we wanted to ask. I'm a political scientist. We're a political science team. We're talking about moving these pictorial designs into the social sciences. So we selected some really common political science survey questions from surveys like the ANES, the World Values Survey, and the Barometer. So Afrobarometer, Latino Barometro, and the Asian Barometer. And we translated these, or tried to with the help of a graphic artist, into a visual version. So there's three main categories of what we visualized or made pictures of: response scales, people and parties, and concepts. So I have some examples here of what I mean by people and parties. We show someone, instead of the text of how do you feel about Theresa May or how do you feel about Justin Trudeau, we show the picture of them and then give a pictorial scale where they can indicate how they feel. Same thing for the parties, right? We just show the party logo and ask someone how they feel. So here's some examples of the more conceptual questions and how we translated them into the visuals. So the top row is all about voting. We wanted to ask, and it's a very common question, especially after COVID, where mail-in voting became much more popular across lots of different countries, whether someone voted by mail or by post, voted in person, or did not vote. So that's what the top row is trying to indicate. As a picture, how did you vote or did you not vote? The second row is about COVID. Hopefully that jumps out at you, that when we took COVID tests, or when you still take a COVID test in case you're testing for it, right? Most places have very similar looking COVID tests, right? It's a little box and you have your control line and your test line. And we are trying to illustrate visually not testing positive for COVID-19 versus testing positive for COVID-19, and using a visual indication of a calendar to ask something like, in 2024, did you test positive for COVID-19? Again, this is a common survey question that we translated into visuals. The bottom row is much more conceptual, and this is where translation into visuals is a lot harder. So I'm going to tell you what each of these represent in our minds, but I'll also tell you a little bit later that we're making adjustments here because when we started validating this, there was some confusion. So our first picture is meant to indicate the family economy or family income, where someone could rate how they feel about their family's economy. The second image is about the US-Mexico border. And the third image, which was the most controversial in our validation, was immigration to Canada. So a lot of people thought this was travel to Canada as opposed to immigration, because who immigrates with just one carry-on suitcase? So we got that feedback. And as I'll talk about in the validation section, we will make changes to this image to make it more clear that it is about immigration. This is an example of the scale. So the third category is a visual scale to allow someone to respond about how they feel about something, or whether they approve or disapprove of certain aspects of Canadian politics, elections, the economy, etc. So we have a slider across a visual scale that people can choose what face or numeric response best illustrates their feelings. This is very similar to those doctor's office pain scales that you might have seen before, of like unhappy to happy. So I mentioned before that a key piece of this research is validation. So we came up with some visuals with a graphic artist, a designer, and we think that they're illustrating the questions. So they're face valid, because we talked to each other and we said, yeah, I think that's right. I think that picture illustrates that question. We wanted to ask other people. So we conducted qualitative interviews, then are currently working on revising them. Then we will do an online validation and revise them again before we actually launch the visual survey, where we're comparing the text to the visuals. So for our interviews, we interviewed 24 adult Canadians, and half of our sample was male and half identified as female. And we had a pretty good mix of ages, right? Young people might be really used to emojis and like graphic depictions. So we wanted to make sure that we were also getting responses from people who are a little bit older and maybe less comfortable with emoji use. And we wanted to get a good mix of people in terms of language use, right? The goal, the idea is that people should be able to understand the visuals and answer the visual questions regardless of their language. So we want to make sure it's not just an English only visual, that it can work for people who are multilingual or prefer French. So in Canada, right, it was easy to get French speakers or native French speakers in order to have that particular demographic group be represented. So in each survey, in each interview, we showed the visual question, just the visual of what we were trying to ask. And we asked the interviewee, what do you think this is asking? Without any prompting or, indication of what we wanted it to say. And then we showed them what we were hoping that it said, and did they think it's a good match or not? In general, they had very similar overall impressions of each question, and we asked them about some preferred scales. So from the results, the people, the parties, the logos that I showed you earlier, like those Canada Party logos, some pictures of politicians, everyone was super thrilled with, thought it was incredibly clear, was able to guess accurately what the question was trying to ask without having to see any text. Some of the concepts were clear and some of them were not. We also had some mixed preferences regarding scales, but they generally all preferred, at the end when we said, okay, would you rather take a survey as visual versus text? They generally preferred the visual version over text. So I want to just share a little bit more detail about what was clear and what was not. So as I said, it was really clear, those COVID test pictures, a political image, a politician image, social media platform logos, party logos, that seemed very easy for everyone to understand. In the upper left, I have what was like mostly clear, but not really clear. So not everyone was able to guess correctly what the question was trying to ask. The voting icons, voting by mail versus voting in person. How do you feel about Canada's economy? That was a little bit unclear. And the bottom right, I have really mixed, maybe like half people got it, half people didn't, of how do you feel about the US-Mexico border? So that green picture I showed before, of it was difficult for some people to identify what border that was or what we were asking about. And the family's economy question was also a little bit difficult. So that image of a wallet with money and the family, it was unclear to a lot of our interviewees that was about the family's economy as opposed to something like income. The things that were incredibly unclear, that basically everyone had a problem with, was that immigration to Canada picture. and how people felt about international relations. That was a really difficult concept to try to illustrate into an image, and indicating if you had appliances of a certain type in your house. So earlier in the slideshow, I had like a refrigerator and a laundry machine. That's what we were showing and asking people to indicate whether they had it or not. And they just didn't, they understood what the picture was depicting, like what appliance it was representing, but they didn't understand what we were asking them to indicate with those appliances. In terms of the scale that I showed you before was the black and white face scale. So we wanted to know if people prefer the black and white face scale to color. And we had some really mixed responses. Some people prefer the color because they think it pops more, it draws the eye, it's more exciting and engaging to use the color scale. Some people did not like the color scale because they thought that these colors didn't actually represent the emotions fairly. Like red, is it happiness or is it anger? We usually associate red with anger, so maybe red should be at the negative end of the scale. So there was just a lot of mixed response about color versus black and white and what was more clear for the respondent to use. We also asked people if they prefer the 5-face scale or more emotional response options, right? Maybe those 5 faces of sad to happy with neutral in between don't fairly reflect your actual feelings or emotions about a particular person or party or what have you. So we have these other images depicting other feelings or responses. Pretty universally, nobody likes this. Too many options, too many things that you could be both happy and confused at the same time. This is not a clear single answer the way that the 5-face scale was. So pretty similar responses from a lot of our interviewees about this scale. Validation is a really important part of survey research. And unfortunately, I don't think that it gets a lot of focus or credit. So when we started this project and we were looking at these other disciplines to see how they designed their visuals and how they validated those visuals, right? The only way that these visuals are going to work in a survey is if we know that the person seeing the picture understands what we're asking them and is able to respond with pictures, with a face scale, whatever it is, in the way that they are intending to, right? That's what makes a valid question, that they get what we're asking and we get their response correctly. This is a problem for all surveys, right? Visuals, of course, we spent a lot more time thinking about how to validate these visuals. We were very frustrated by some of the existing research and how they didn't actually lay out what their validation procedure was to make sure that people besides the research team understood and could accurately describe what the question was asking of them. But this is true for all surveys, right? Even text questions, you could write a question and think that it's incredibly straightforward of what you're asking someone. But when they go to read it, you're not there to explain it to them. And they might interpret the question differently, which means the data that you receive from that question, from that response, doesn't mean what you think it is, right? So the survey data that we're getting from these instruments require all questions, whether text or visual, to be validated for the data to have any meaning. So I told you we did our interviews, and now we are working on with our artists to make some adjustments to our pictures based on the feedback and responses that we got. If anyone in the chat, saw some of the pictures and also wants to give us feedback about whether it was clear or not, please do. We're still in the stage of making adjustments to those pictures. So our next step, once we make those adjustments, is to validate again. So we want to take those revised images and show them to, again, Canadian adults that we've randomly sampled and ask them to match the revised visuals to survey question text, again, to just ensure that the visuals are representing what we think they are to potential respondents for the survey. Once we are really confident that our pictures are good, that we have valid questions, we will then do this testing of visual versus text. So take a bunch of Canadian adults, randomize whether they see the same question or what the question is trying to say in text versus as a picture. See, have everyone take those versions to compare. And then again, ask at the end about their satisfaction, their engagement with the experience, because we want to see, is it faster to use visuals? Is it more engaging? Is it language independent? Because we really hope that people who, regardless of their first language or regardless of their comfort with reading a lot of text, prefer visual surveys. So key takeaways that I hope that you got from my talk, that online surveys are really great tools because they make survey research both more accessible for researchers who don't have the budgets to, go out and do surveys in the field or hire a lot of enumerators to do phone surveys. And in a lot of situations, more accessible for participants because all they need is internet access to be able to be a part of the survey. But we're worried that text-only online surveys are underrepresenting and excluding low literacy individuals or people who use languages that are not common translations. Visual surveys are really common in health and medicine and psychology, but they're not really used in social science. So we are trying to bring visual surveys to social science. People and logos and emotional response scales seem to be pretty easy so far to translate into visuals. Complicated concepts about foreign relations, diplomacy, the economy, a little bit more difficult to translate into visuals. We hope that visual surveys can be more accessible, quicker for respondents, and more engaging. But what's really important and what we've learned from doing this project, and we hope that all survey researchers take more seriously, is validating those questions, both text and visual, to make sure that the data that you're getting from your responses means what you think it does. So thank you so much for giving me the time to talk. I'd love to hear questions, feedback, whatever you have about this project.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cuttner. I really, really appreciate it. That was a gorgeous presentation about a really important topic because we will have lots of discussion. People can go ahead and raise their hands if they want to ask a question live. And it's one of the things that's really important about this type of work that you're doing is that there isn't going to be any solution that is going to work for everyone. I mean, I designed so many surveys and I know you do as well. And there's always this desire to I get asked almost every day, how can we design a survey that's going to work for everybody? And the answer is you cannot. And one of the things we have to consider is the choices that we're making in these surveys and who is going to get prioritized and is who is getting prioritized in the way we design our surveys in alignment with our project priorities. And the fact that you're working on validating and getting into like the quote unquote acceptable literature, additional options that can be used for projects that have very specific priorities is so, so important. And I'm so grateful. And as you can see, we have lots of people with their hands up, and there's also lots of questions in the chat. So we will do our best to get through. Okay. I believe, I don't know if it's Dana or Dana, but from FEMA, hand
Yep,
up.
it's
Hey,
Dana. Yep.
Dana, great.
Hello.
It's great
Yep.
to see you. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. This is an interesting topic. I have not considered low literacy as as an accessibility issue, and I'm glad that I logged on today and I caught the end of the presentation. So I apologize if this is covered earlier, but it really opened my eyes to some possibilities. Is there anybody at the beginning of a survey sort of giving people a branch? One branch could be text-based, but another branch might be, for example, the questions are asked auditory. It would play a recording of the question, and then the people might be able to either type a response or do a verbal response and have that coded into the data. So I was just curious if that's anything that's on the horizon or something we should be thinking about. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know about the capacity for any of the survey software that I use about letting the respondent record their answer. I think that would be really helpful, though maybe difficult to code accurately. We definitely do branching a lot in my work, at least, because we love to randomize things. So allowing survey respondents to choose how they want to see the questions, text versus visual or text versus audio, and then having those audio descriptors in the survey itself, I think is something that I haven't seen a lot of work on that, but I think it has been used. The only concern, of course, as Heather brought up, like you have to make trade-offs, you have to make choices based on what population you want represented in your survey, is that if there was an audio option, if you were surveying multilingual or diverse groups of linguistic, different language users, it would have to be translated into different languages. So audio is, like, I think, a really great other strategy to help include low literacy populations or people who just don't like to read a lot of text. But the concern is then having to translate those audio questions into as many languages as the respondents use.
Great question. I hadn't even thought about branching, but of course, that's a great idea. Great question, and it wasn't covered at the beginning. And if you missed the beginning and you want to see it, we are going to put the recording up at the link in the chat. Annie, hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. I think Chris actually had their hand up before me if they would like to go first.
Oh, great. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Okay, thanks. I was trying to find my like it's all good like like type that fast enough, but thank you. So the reactions to the not favorable reactions to the more subtle emotion thing was starting to strike me because I would have guessed the opposite. So thank you for doing that work and getting my wheels turning. The second is it leaned me into a couple of things which made me think about, like, when we use the words, strongly disagree to strongly agree, usually the middle, like your meh face, is like we say the word neutral. And so one piece was like, have you ever tried to then have both the neutral face and an I don't know face, or like a question mark, because those are different things, and do people like that? And then the other is the face on, I don't know why. I was fine with the super happy face for agree, but the face on the left for strongly disagree, I was like, am I supposed to be shocked, angry, sad? Like, I don't know why the nuance on strongly disagree was different for me than agree, but those are two reflections that I was having and really curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question or reflections. So we definitely see that people love to choose neutral as a response, either because they're hesitant to, say something really strong or like put themselves out on a limb in that way, or because maybe they actually do feel neutrally. And as you said, part of having a valid question is being able to know exactly what the respondent meant when they made a certain indication. So when we have agree scales, whether faces or temperature scales of happiness, feelings thermometers, we call them in political science, right? If we don't have a not applicable or don't know option, people tend to just put neutral, right? If I don't know who Justin Trudeau is, I don't want to say I really love him or I really hate him, so I'm just going to put neutral. And that is a validity problem, right? Because we don't know if someone put neutral, does it mean they actually feel neutrally, or does it mean that they don't know this person and it's not an applicable question to them? So we are working to try, we have the don't know face. It's the one that's like kind of shrugging. It's like, and has a question mark. So that is our like don't know emoji that our graphic designer made for us in black and white. Our difficulty right now is this is just like so in the weeds, but the survey platform that we're using is Qualtrics, and we're able to embed the images of the faces across the scale But to have a non-scale option like an NA or a don't know, where instead of choosing along the scale, someone like clicks a box on the side outside of the scale saying don't know, is not able to take an image. So the way that we have it set up now, it's the image scale of the faces and then a checkbox that says not applicable. Unfortunately, it's not the like shrugging face as the don't know or not applicable. So that's something that we are trying to work on to include.
Great. Thank you so much. There's so much activity. People love this topic. Annie, thank you for waiting.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Allison, so much for this presentation. This is so fascinating. My question is about if you looked at the different interpretations or relative difficulty of interpretations against things like demographics, and if there were certain types of people who had more or less trouble interpreting specific questions, thinking specifically of the migration or the immigration logo or icon, and if migrants potentially were better or worse at interpreting that, or something along the lines of gender and thinking like reproductive health, things like that, if you had any insight.
So that's a great question. And that's an analysis that we're currently conducting because we only just finished our interviews last week. So we're going through all of the transcripts to get those very specific details about demographic characteristics of our respondents and whether that had any trend in the misinterpretations. Unfortunately, for the immigration question, literally everyone got it wrong. Like regardless of age, gender, occupation, language status, it was not clearly immigration for anyone. How they suggested how it could be changed, because we asked everyone, like, is there a way that you think this could be more clear? Like we can't think of everything of like, I'm not a graphic designer. And so we wanted to know what real people would suggest of like, if I wanted to convey this text or this concept via image, what would it look like? And we did see some, I don't want to say like concretely, because again, we're still analyzing the data, but I think the way that people made suggestions of how things would change did vary quite strongly by demographic lines. So older people had different suggestions, more similar to one another than really young people, and men and women had slightly different suggestions, especially about like the picture, the family pictures, or the appliance question stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Allison. That's really well, look forward to hearing what you find. Hi, Julia. How are you?
Hi. I kind of like the direction that this is going. To me, I would have bombed that test because I just don't see things the way that other people see them. And so I think testing it with neurodiverse people, particularly those with autism spectrum, would be a good idea. And, for me, having the pictures along with text would be, the best approach to, survey me.
Absolutely. And I think I would be the same way. Like having both the picture and the text would, for me, make it easier to use both to kind of triangulate on what the question is intending to ask. And if it's something that I'm really clear or leaning, the picture is sufficiently clear that I don't need to take the time to read the text, or the text is sufficiently clear that I can ignore the picture, like that would be ideal. So our hope, and what we've seen a lot in the literature that does this, is to use hybrid. So a single question that combines both the text and the image, so that someone could choose which one they want to look at or use both to triangulate. The reason that we haven't done that in this testing, right, is because if we give someone both the text and the image at the same time, we don't know if they're just relying on the text and the picture is like distracting and it has nothing to do, it's like really not valid to translate the text into the picture. It's just there and they're only relying on the text. The only way that we can be sure sure that the image is like the correct or valid version of the text is to do them completely separately. But that is exactly what we want to do. But thank you for bringing up like neurodivergence. That's something that we haven't actually thought about in terms of our demographic recruitment for our testing. And that's something that I would definitely bring back to the team to make sure that we're including those populations. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. We have used these types of surveys, not nearly as rigorously as you are. This was several decades ago with populations that were pretty close to illiterate. And it made a huge difference in especially the representation of women in our surveys, and our ability to assess whether things were actually going the way that the women in the communities we were working to understand, whether things were going the way that those women wanted them or not. And so we knew that it wasn't, that we were doing trade-offs, all the trade-offs that you're talking about. But sometimes choosing a different set of trade-offs to actually get input from your core constituency is critically important, and that's the whole power dynamics of generating research. And so these are fantastic. We have a bunch of questions that, again, I'm not sure you're going to be able to answer, but they are all around one theme, which is like national regulations about different disability laws and compliance. You seem like you're very early or in your thing, and but do you have any idea of like how this works with screen readers? Is this compliant with various national government disability regulations, or is that to come?
So I have no idea. That is not something that we have worked on so far. I hope that the typical survey platforms that we tend to use in our discipline are compliant. I'm like assume that they are. So I hope that on the user side, like as a survey builder using those platforms, we have used outside of this project images in surveys before, not taking the place of the question, but to sort of add to it or illustrate to it. And I never received any like pop-up box or anything of like, describe this image in text to show or to like help if someone was using a screen reader, for example. So I think that that's definitely something that we would want to do. If our hope is that because we picked these like really kind of typical political science survey questions to validate and then allow others to use, because these are common questions, anyone can just take these visuals, know that they're already validated and use them. So we would include the descriptor of those visuals for then someone to input for a screen reader, for example. So that's like the end goal, but I think I want to complain to some of our survey platforms about not pushing those options to the forefront for a survey designer, in terms of not making the requirements for full accessibility clear when you are putting an image into a survey.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I think that there are that's great. That's great to hear. We probably have time for one more question. So there's so much happening in the chat. I'm trying to see if we're gonna consolidate maybe a themed question. Yes. Lots of feedback on the fact that large proprietary survey platforms do not always have accessibility as their priority. And yes.
I don't want to like pick a bone with Qualtrics in particular. I do use Qualtrics. I love their product. I love it. But I will say, just to like pat ourselves on the back, one of the visual scales that we were testing, like I showed you the black and white one versus the color faces. Qualtrics actually has a built-in visual face scale. It is a vertical slider as opposed to horizontal, and it has a single emoji face that changes as you adjust the slider. And we wanted to offer this to our interviewees as an option of like, here are some different scales. Like, what do you think? Universally hated. Everyone hates the built-in visual Qualtrics scale for responses, partially because you can't see the options until you do the slide, and partially because we tend to read left to right or on a horizontal scale. So think like just the flip of needing to adjust your feelings as a positive scale didn't feel intuitive for our respondents. So I want to shout out, like, I use Qualtrics. I love Qualtrics. The ability to add in these images to a standard Qualtrics survey, it has been really effective and useful for us. But if you're doing Qualtrics and you want to incorporate visuals, I do not recommend using their face slider.
Yeah, that's a great detail to surface, because, you know, the defaults are hardly ever sensitive to or in alignment with the priorities of your context and your project. And so defaults are basically centering the needs of the software platforms, and they're great that they're there, and then it reminds you to change them to align with your ideas. But it's good to know that they have enough flexibility in that platform. One of the other things I want to emphasize is not a question, but a lot of people are talking in the chat about how this is a great example of cross-sectoral or interdisciplinary collaboration. And I just can't emphasize that enough, that that the best data ideas that I see regularly almost always come from things that are just assumed in one sector, and then, you know, another sector doesn't even think about it. And that's one of the things that I'm so grateful about for this community at Talking Data Equity, because we have people from, you know, lots of countries and lots of sectors, and the willingness of people like you to come and like bring different threads together. And then you can see folks from all different sectors and parts of the world adding in their raw materials and their insights from their social location. And I'm really, really grateful for that. And I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing and the fact that you took time today to come and share it with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun, and I look forward to looking at the recording so I can see what everyone wrote in the chat after the fact. And hopefully, you know, if a lot of you are in Canada, so you might get an email about trying to be a validator or a respondent for one of our surveys. So please say yes if you do. And I really appreciate the time and the really thoughtful questions and feedback that everyone had today. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, for sure. And feel free. People in this chat would love to participate, I'm sure, in your further validation and testing. And next week we are back. We're back for a lot of weeks now. I know we took a couple of weeks off while I was in Salt Lake City. Next week it's going to be me as a special guest, and we're going to talk about how to think about handling missing data with an equity lens, because it's a common problem and a very requested situation, and about to become, unfortunately, a lot more common. So we're going to talk about different options that you have when you have missing data and you need to still make some meaning. So we're going to do that. And then in 2 weeks, we have some researchers who are testing some work on the pros and cons of how to deal with multiple selection race data. And I know a lot of you struggle with that or have to make that choice every day. So again, thank you for being part of our community. Thank you for reminding me and each other that this work is still worth it. This work is still happening, and you are not alone. And a huge, again, thank you, Allison. This project is so cool. People have already, you'll see in the chat later, expressed a ton of appreciation. It's a really, really important thing to get some research on. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, great. See you all next week. Bye.